done it through your peaceful, resolved defense of your neighbors and the Constitution. So, once again, Minnesotans, stay peaceful, stay safe. Change is coming, and we can feel it. But this fight still goes on. And I'm just glad today to be joined in person because it's someone who's been at the side of Minnesotans throughout this and through every other thing we've gone through over the last 7 years. Um, Someone who we describe as the people's lawyer, someone who is fighting this battle for the Constitution, for the safety of Minnesotans in courts every single day. I want to give this over to Attorney General Keith Ellison to talk a little bit about what's going on with the state on some of the lawsuits and what our expectations are in the coming days. Attorney General?
Thank you, Governor. Governor Walsh, thank you for your excellent leadership during this very, very difficult time. This unprecedented time, Governor, because quite honestly, there's never been a deployment of immigration agents this size in the history of the United States. There have been times in American history where they've deported a lot of people, but a concentrated deployment of ICE agents in one state in one period of time is unprecedented. And therefore, there's no playbook. And therefore, nobody knows exactly how to deal with this situation, but it is unique and particularly puzzling given that Minnesota does not have the highest immigration in the United States, given that Minnesota has a very, very professional community of law enforcement professionals who are taking care of the safety of our state, given the fact that the Department of Corrections, pursuant to state law, hands over people who ICE is looking for and they have proper paperwork for. Given all of that, this is a very curious situation and would reasonably lead someone to ask why. So let me talk about Alex Pretti. Alex Pretti was a nurse at the VA. I happen to have a son who's 31 years old who spent 5 years in the United States military as a combat medic. But toward the end of his deployment and the end of his service, he wanted to go into nursing, and so he did, and ended up getting an RN degree and works in the healthcare system here in Minnesota. And when he was at work today and last night, he said, "Look, my colleagues were crying and in tears, and they took this hit to one of their own very personally." And he said, "I did too." He said, I didn't find myself shedding tears, but I could have because I just was brokenhearted because I know the service that he and the love and compassion he puts into taking care of the people he took care of at the VA. An intensive care nurse, kind, compassionate person to friend and family, described by coworkers as the first person who would jump in to help. And he was our neighbor, and he should still be with us right now. So let me just note that Superintendent Drew Evans of the BCA, another exemplary professional in our state, he is the BCA is the state's investigative agency, and it is their job to investigate crime. They have a specialized unit to investigate the use of force cases. They arrived on site after the shooting and were refused access. They then secured a judicial warrant, a warrant signed by a judge, which has never been needed before, and were still refused access. This is uncharted territory. Now, friends, this comes at the tail end of other offenses, like a shooting in North Minneapolis and another homicide in South Minneapolis, Renee Nicole Good, where they also were denied access to the scene, and investigators are, to this moment, still being denied access to the investigative file. This is not a rash decision for us to go to court and to seek a temporary restraining order from a judge to preserve evidence and prevent the destruction of evidence. I don't care if you're conservative, liberal, or whatever, but you should at least be in favor of conserving evidence in a homicide. And to have to go get An order from a judge to preserve that evidence is extraordinary and should alarm everyone who believes in equal justice under the law and who believes that every person, no matter how this case ultimately is resolved, deserves to have their case investigated to get to the truth of what happened. This is an extraordinary moment in an unprecedented time, and we're doing all we can to step up to that moment. My office represents the BCA and joined the Hennepin County Attorney's Office in a lawsuit last night, as you know, and we moved to prevent the destruction and or tampering with evidence related to Alex Pretty's shooting. And this includes any evidence the federal agents took from the scene of the shooting, preventing the state authorities from inspecting it. We've never had to do anything like this before. Never before. We filed that motion last night and for a temporary restraining order asking the court to take immediate action to preserve the evidence. And last night, within 2 hours of the filing, a judge granted the motion. The Department of Homeland Security and the federal government are now enjoined from destroying or altering evidence related to yesterday's shooting. The fact that anyone would ever think that an agent of the federal government might even think about doing such a thing was completely unforeseeable only a few weeks ago. But now, this is what we have to do. As we said in our filing last night, the irreparable harm we would suffer if the federal government were allowed to destroy evidence is so weighty that any harm to the federal government does not even budge the scales in a court balancing of the scales. It's imperative that we preserve as much evidence as possible so that the state investigators are allowed to access the evidence to ensure a fair, thorough investigation. And I will say, I've heard not one single law enforcement or investigative agent in the state of Minnesota say that they won't share information with the federal government. I've heard quite the opposite from the federal government. Now, Operation Metro Surge. As I noted when I started, this appears to be the largest single deployment or surge of immigration agents in the history of the country. And as a result, tremendous damage has been inflicted upon our state. We've had 2 killings within 2 weeks in an additional non-lethal shooting. We've had countless numbers of people who have been stopped and had the demand for their papers, to have to show their papers in America. We've had door-to-door knocks where people have their homes barged into without cause of right. And we've had stores have to shutter, students not going to school. We've had reduction in employees going to their job sites. We've had jobs being, little markets being shut down, restaurants being interfered with. We've had a countless number of harms. And so we took the action of suing the federal government over Operation Metro Surge. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to be in federal court with my team arguing for a restraining order against Operation Metro Surge. I filed this case almost 2 weeks ago, and this will be our first hearing. The lawsuit we filed is one that is caused by the unprecedented nature of this surge. It is a novel abuse of the Constitution that we're looking at right now. No one can remember a time when we've seen something like this, when a state can marshal facts to show that our targeting is not based on excessive amounts of undocumented immigrants or anything like that, but we're targeted because of politics, which violates our First Amendment rights. The 10th Amendment, which we are entitled as a state to equal sovereignty, and we have been denied that. The federal government is literally commandeering and coercing the state of Minnesota to bend to its will, which is the prerogative of the people of the state of Minnesota. Let me remind everybody, let me take everybody back to 8th grade civics. The states predate the United States and came into the Union preserving their rights as states to be the states that the citizens of those states want them to be within a constitutional framework. It is at the fundamental, it is in the DNA of American history that the federal government cannot trample over the prerogatives of the state. And that is exactly what is happening here, and that is exactly why we're going to court. This surge has drained local law enforcement time and resources. Jacob Fry, if he were here, could tell you that they've spent north of $2 million on overtime responding to ICE. They've damaged our economy, hurt our education system, and terrorized community members. And it must stop, and tomorrow is a big step in that direction. Now, as I noted a moment ago, people will ask, well, why Minnesota? I'll say this: Minnesota is dealing with targeted oppression from the federal government because of who we are and who we value. Minnesota is a place where we welcome the stranger. We have a number of nonprofits that focus on refugee resettlement in Minnesota. Minnesota is a place where we take care of the vulnerable among us. We're a state that just passed paid family leave. We're a state that believes in feeding our kids who are in school, and we're a state that believes that Minnesota is a great place to live for everyone, no matter where you were born. Of course, we obey all laws, but we still believe that immigration is not a sin. They're coming after our state, in my view, because of what we stand for, because we voted 3 times in favor of somebody not Donald Trump, which he has publicly said he resents deeply and believes is not even true. I can tell you it's not about fraud. Because if he sent people who understand forensic accounting, we'd be having a different conversation. But he's sending armed, masked men. This is a pretext, and it's not supported by the facts at all, which has brought us to court challenging the justification that the president has offered. For those watching around the country, I would submit to you that just as Portland and Chicago and LA were precursors to Minneapolis, Minneapolis is a precursor to a whole lot of other places that they have their eye on right here, right now, including Maine and several other states. If we don't stop this behavior here, it will only expand, and it won't be good for anyone in our country. Minnesota is staying strong, and I want to join Governor Walz in my just pride in being a Minnesotan. No football game victory could ever make me feel as good about our state as I do about people standing up, helping their neighbors, engaging in mutual aid, giving each other rides different places, making sure that there's enough groceries, protesting, using their First Amendment rights. This state has a lot of spirit. And Minnesota nice is a real thing. I wasn't fortunate enough to be born in Minnesota. I was born and grew up in Michigan. And I can tell you that this state has a lot of nice people. It really does. And a lot of people who believe in taking care of their neighbor and welcoming the stranger. And as we see right now, resisting tyranny. So I just want to say that as the courage of protesters and others who are helping their neighbors is so evident on the streets of this great state of ours, we at the Attorney General's office and in Minnesota state government can do no less than match the courage you have already shown. And we will not back down, we won't blink, we won't bow. We will stand firmly on our constitutional rights and in favor of Minnesotans. We will do that in the ballot box, at the courts. We will do that in the streets in a peaceful, legal, First Amendment protected way. And we will do it in a multitude of ways. But one thing we will not do is we will not back down and we will not bend. And so let me wrap up by saying this. We will never forget Alex Pretti. We will never forget Renee Nicole Good. And we will never forget any of the Minnesotans who have suffered so unjustifiably in this time. Minnesota is a great place. That is why I believe we've been targeted. But it's not going to work. And we'll be in court tomorrow arguing for the rights of every Minnesotan to stand up and be the generous, courageous people that we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General. We'll be glad to take some questions, folks. Tom?
Wells, you got a letter from Attorney General Pam Bondi making several demands, I guess you would call them, regarding sanctuary cities, regarding fraud and voter rolls. Your response to that, and is there anything you can do to meet the Trump administration at least part of the way to try to turn this temperature down?
Well, first of all, it's not a serious attempt, and the Attorney General sent that in. I would thank the local folks and Commissioner Snell. Thank you to you and your team over there. In that letter, they talked about, you need to hand people over who are in your jails. They're taking credit for people that we've had in jail for a long time. We always hand them over, and the commissioner very clearly. So they're lying. They're lying. This has nothing to do with fraud, as the Attorney General said. They're not sending us forensic accountants, and these are things that have been we're dealing with now and have been for quite some time. So look, it's not a serious attempt to get at this. The way to fix this is get these folks out of here. We've continued to work with them. They asked us for these numbers. We provided them. We continue to show, and they're not serious. And look, I think everybody understands what the last request was, totally unrelated to anything on the voter files. This is, again, as the Attorney General said, Donald Trump telling everybody that the election was rigged, who started all this nightmare for America. Has nothing to do with it. And I would just give a pro tip to the Attorney General. There's 2 million documents in the Epstein files we're still waiting on. Go ahead and work on those.
For you or the Attorney General, if they're not honoring judicial warrants, how can you trust that they're going to be honoring this temporary restraining order?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked it because, since Trump 2 began, and even including Trump 1, we filed a lot of lawsuits. We're north of 50 now, and they've been on everything from birthright citizenship to SNAP to things like the National Institute of Health to EV to all kinds of things, and they've been complying with the orders. Now, I will say, the foot drag, we've had to threaten them with contempt a few times, and I'm not saying that the compliance has been good. I am saying that open defiance of court orders is not something that we've experienced. And so I have every reason to believe that they will obey the court order. Now, if they don't, we have recourse and we'll pursue that recourse. On a deeper level, your question, I would simply say this. Just because they may not do the right thing does not absolve us of the responsibility of doing the right thing. We're going to seek legal recourse, and if they disobey a court order, then that's on them. But we're going to seek those orders, and we're going to insist that they be followed.
Local sheriffs have said they lack the legal authority to honor ICE detainers, and that's something that Attorney General Ellison has said as well. They lack the authority under Minnesota law. Is that an authority you could just give them? Could you pass a law? Yeah.
So really, the key issue here is I think most sheriffs in the state do fully honor ICE detainers and provide notification. The issue becomes when they have a lawful reason to be released, bail, released by judicial order. The jail cannot hold that person beyond that point in time. That's the fundamental issue. There is not a lack of cooperation. There is just some legal boundaries. We've had some conversations with ICE about this. We think that there may be some things that could be worked out, but I don't think that's the core issue that we're really dealing with here.
Can I simply say that it puts Minnesota in a very difficult position, because if such a person were held beyond a period of time when the state court has the authority to hold them, then the state court is exposing itself to liability. So ICE just has to show up and do its job.
That's
Within-
the fundamental question here. And that's the fundamental argument they keep making. We cooperate. We don't do their job. You saw it this week with rural conservative Cottonwood County. Sheriff had someone, told them this person's time is done. We can't just hold them indefinitely. It's against the law. So we're going to release this guy. Come and get him. They're too busy up here doing what they did yesterday to go pick up someone who actually should be removed from this country. And I don't know how many times they try and confuse the people across this country. It's their job to do immigrations and customs enforcement. It's law enforcement's job to do law enforcement in Minnesota. They are not doing immigration enforcement, saying we should be doing that, while they're apparently now trying to do extrajudicial law enforcement on our streets. So this is a red herring. It's untrue. The Attorney General of the United States put falsehoods into a letter she sends to me that we are doing what's asked of us, but we're not going to do your job for you. We have other things we need to do.
Are you getting back to the evidence in Pretti
Right.
case, that you might not get access to his camera footage and that you might not get to the bottom of whether he was carrying an ID or not?
I am deeply concerned about the preservation of evidence, which is why we went to court last night. But I have faith in Judge Tonsru's order that it will be followed, and I can tell you that Minnesota officials are going to do everything we can to get to the truth. And again, as a prosecutor, I am not allowed to say what the final outcome is going to be. We have to get the evidence and find out. But if you're asking me, Tom, if I'm concerned, you better believe I am concerned. But look, they've got the order. Now they're going to defy the court if they don't follow it.
With Vice President Vance, when he was in town on Thursday, I understand.
did.
Can you tell us about what the tenor of that meeting was? His goal was to turn down the temperature. 2 days later, there was the shooting.
Well, I guess it didn't work, huh? I mean, here's the thing. Governor Walz and I were in Congress together for 12 years before both of us went to go serve in state government. We're used to talking to these folks. Why not see if there's something that can be arrived at? I can tell you that it was a polite meeting. I can also tell you that I walked out of there thinking that we probably weren't going to get anywhere. Because quite honestly, a few hours late, not even hours, a few minutes later, he just got up there and just articulated the same talking points he made to me in the meeting. I tried to correct him. He didn't want to hear that. And so I'm like, well, welcome to Minnesota. Thank you very much. You both of us have things to do. So see you later. And I left. It was cordial enough, but it was not fruitful. But look, I just think that, and I'm sure the governor agrees, if you can try to talk to somebody sensibly, we do. But that one didn't get where we had hoped.
Yeah, Lauren Gurley here from the Washington Post. Do you know if the federal agents who were directly around Pretti during the time of the shooting are still out on the street in the Twin Cities or anywhere else in Minnesota? Any of them?
Don't know. They don't talk to us. They don't tell us. They don't.
And with the BCA being denied access to the scene after getting a warrant, is there recourse for them that way? Or do you feel that this restraining order that you obtained requiring the federal government to preserve evidence is that recourse?
So there are certain legal strategy decisions that I'm not at liberty to just go on about in a meeting like this one. What I can tell you is that both the warrant and the TRO are evidence of our resolve. And we are going to get to the truth of what happened to Mr. Alex Pretti and to the truth of what happened to Renee Good. And that's what we're pledging. And we're going to use every legal means to do that. So I can't tell you, I'm not at liberty to tell you what you're asking me, but I am here to assure the public and who's listening that we are going to get to the truth of this matter, and we won't be deterred and we won't be denied.
Gibson, we did see BCA agents at the shooting scene this morning. Can you confirm what they were doing there?
Absolutely. The question was about whether or not the BCA agents were on the scene of the shooting this morning, and they were continuing to collect evidence that they've seen. They're also doing some canvassing of the neighborhoods. I don't want to get into any more of the investigative process in this, but at the BCA, we are going to continue to investigate this shooting based on whatever evidence we're able to get, and we appreciate the Attorney General assisting us with the temporary restraining order to make sure that the federal government is retaining evidence that will be available, we would assume, to us at a later time. But the investigation will not pause. We are continuing to work on anything and everything that we possibly can.
I'm just going to close. I'm going to close with one thing that I promised the parents with Michael and Susan. And I speak to all Americans on this over these last 24 hours, what you saw. You're now knowing more about this young man, beloved by his family, accomplished ICU nurse, skillful in ability to work with veterans, someone who's beloved by community, no criminal record, lawful firearms owner. And you know what you saw. And then you heard the most powerful people in the world, certainly in this country, President, Vice President, Greg Bovino, Kristi Noem, narrate to you what you were looking at, that this was a domestic terrorist, crazed, running at law enforcement with the intent to kill massive numbers of them, sullying his name within minutes of this event happening, and then closing the crime scene, sweeping away the evidence, defying a court order, and not allowing anyone to look at it. I don't care if you are conservative and you are flying a Donald Trump flag, you're a libertarian, don't tread on me, you're a democratic socialist of America. This is an inflection point, America. If we cannot all agree that the smearing of an American citizen and besmirching everything they stood for and asking us not to believe what we saw, I don't know what else to tell you. This has to be the moment. Your government, here in Minnesota, I've made it clear, I'm accountable for things that happen here, and I will take responsibility for that. Someone has to be accountable. Someone has to hold the final decision on this. And sitting behind a keyboard at 2 a.m. and besmirching a VA nurse and a son and a coworker and a friend is despicable beyond all description. This is not, we need to see both sides. This is not, we need to wait for this. This is basic human decency. And at this point in time, I'm just asking, try for a moment to set aside the political side of it and go back and ground in the humanity of this. This family has gone through enough, and to have the most powerful man in the world drag their dead son with absolutely no evidence and gaslight the entire country, this is enough. And I would say, President Trump, you can end this today. Pull these folks back. Do humane, focused, effective immigration control. You've got the support of all of us to do that. Let our law enforcement continue to do what they do, making Minnesota one of the safest states in the country, one of the best places to live. Allow our children to go back to school. We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota. And there's one person who can end this now. And I'll go back to it again. Please show some decency, pull these folks out, reset this situation, and allow us to do the job that the Attorney General, myself, were elected to do: protect the people of Minnesota and carry out the laws of Minnesota. We'll be back with you when we get more information.
Okay, that was Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, along with the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, both of whom were in Congress for many years. And then, of course, decided to serve in state government, obviously talking about the latest shooting of a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. This is the second time in less than 3 weeks that a U.S. citizen has been killed by ICE. And this is a situation that has gotten the attention of not only the Democrats, those, of course, are two Democrats, Tim Walz and Keith Ellison, but several Republicans, interestingly enough, are starting to speak out, and particularly the libertarian wing of the Republican Party. I haven't looked at Rand Paul's account lately, but certainly Thomas Massey has shown up, as he typically does, libertarian from Kentucky. And he is a very conservative member. In fact, I can remember he had a Christmas card with all of his family on the Christmas card with weapons. And I'm talking military assault style weapons. But at any rate, about 5 hours ago this morning, Thomas Massey wrote on his social media account X, carrying a firearm is not a death sentence. It's a constitutionally protected God-given right. And if you don't understand this, you have no business in law enforcement or government. He was responding to a U.S. attorney's statement, which is going along with this idea of, you know, if you had a gun and you were around ICE and you deserve to get shot. That's one of the sort of low-level talking points that you're seeing from MAGA Republicans, where there's a lot of discussion about, well, he had a gun, and so because he had a gun, it's his fault that this happened. You brought it on yourself because you had a gun around ICE, and you shouldn't have had a gun around ICE. Of course, that's countered with the basic fact that he, of course, was legally carrying. He had his gun registered for concealed carry. He had a concealed carry permit. And in fact, what you can see on the many videos of this incident is that one of the ICE personnel members removed the gun, his gun, Alex Pretty's gun, from his holster. He probably said out loud the word gun, although I have not heard that particular video where he did say out loud the word gun, which is a standard law enforcement procedure when you see a gun. But what happens next is that the agent, one of the agents standing over Alex Pretty, proceeds to shoot him. We don't know how many times exactly, but it sounded like 4 shots went off. Then we have the federal government moving in and taking control over the investigation of this incident, just like they did with Renee Good on January 7. And the local officials are not allowed to investigate the incident. So effectively, you have Kristi Noem's office, Bovino, who's in charge of U.S. Border Control. Kristi Noem is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. These people are running this investigation. They are really not allowing the local officials in to run that. Now, the state of Minnesota has sued over that, over maintaining evidence, and they are trying to investigate. And they can't really do that because the federal government is in the way, stopping them from getting involved in the investigation. Now we see protests in San Francisco and Washington, D.C., and of course, Minnesota. What happened shortly after this shooting yesterday morning on January 24 in Minnesota, the shooting of Alex Pretty. A bunch of people, citizens in Minnesota, got into the streets and protested. And that drove ICE back to wherever they hang out, probably hotels, but at any rate, that drove them back. That, of course, didn't stop the administration from continuing on with their messaging, chiefly coming from Donald Trump, and then that messaging is really being followed by several others. And, you know, effectively their messaging was, when they first came out, was to accuse Alex Pretty of being a domestic terrorist. Of course, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. And that's problematic because when you make that type of charge, somebody's a domestic terrorist, of course, they didn't even know who he was. And they got flat cold busted. And it turns out he's an ICU nurse. So he's an intensive care unit nurse. And is very well liked. He's a very well liked individual. I mean, I don't think it really makes any difference whether he's well liked or not well liked, but it just turns out that Alex Pretti is a intensive care nurse. And being in the nursing profession, just like the teaching profession, being in the military, it's a very well liked profession in the United States. People respect greatly that profession. And that's problematic for everybody on Team MAGA who's trying to put out as much negative information as possible on Alex Pretti. That was a huge mistake, and it's backfiring. It's backfiring because you have now several, including a law enforcement association that represents the police. You have the Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota. They're putting out statements really sort of pushing back on this whole incident and saying, let's be de-escalating. I think anybody who's in professional law enforcement understands this is hugely problematic because you don't want to, as a professional law enforcement officer, get confused with these ICE people, because these ICE personnel individuals seem to have no procedure. And I think police work was tough already, and now you have this extrajudicial police force from the federal government making decisions to execute people on the streets of an American city. I mean, that is what this is at the end of the day. And it is difficult to navigate that if you are a law enforcement officer who has to go out on the street every day and patrol a city. People in the back of their mind are confusing your work with the work of this federal government entity that would appear to have no rules. And they do have Stephen Miller in the background saying that they have full immunity for all of their actions. So that right there is, I think, very problematic for professional law enforcement. And now you're starting to see now signs of professional law enforcement sort of stepping up and saying, look, we don't need an extra headache. The job is hard enough and complicated enough. We don't need to complicate it any further. So there's that going on in the background. Insane situation, of course, brought on by Donald Trump, who just, for some reason, enjoys chaos. I think he's listening to Stephen Miller. You can hear people saying things like he is poorly advised. I think that would be an understatement. And this is what the state of play is. But once people start getting out into the streets, this turns into a whole new ball game, because what that demonstrates is that people are not into this. They're not for this. They're not in support of this. We already have polls showing that. But let's look at some of the interview on CNN with Dana Bash this morning with Gregory Bovino, who is the head of U.S. Customs Service. Now, he made some statements yesterday I think it's easy to say were problematic, but let's listen to what he said this morning.
Border Patrol Commander at Large, Greg Bovino. Thank you for being here. Sir, you are still in Minneapolis, and I want to get to a lot of questions that we have that are unanswered. First and foremost is that Alex Pretti approached Border Patrol agents with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. I want to go back to one of the videos, and I know you can see it there, and I want to ask you about what you're seeing, because multiple angles of this incident show him holding up a cell phone and recording it, not a gun. Did he at any point pull out his weapon?
Dana, good morning, and thanks for having me. The weapon, and we do know that the suspect did bring a weapon, a loaded 9mm high-capacity handgun to a riot. We do know that. As far as what happened in that intervening moment with the video that you just showed, that's going to come to light through the investigation. That's being investigated, and those facts and those questions will be answered soon enough.
Okay, but the Homeland Security Secretary is not waiting for that investigation to take place before saying that Alex Pretti was, quote, brandishing a weapon. Let's go to video 7, because, of course, you know this far better than I. The definition of brandishing is waving or flourishing something, especially a weapon, as a threat or an anger and excitement. That's just a still photo of what Alex Pretti appears to be holding. There is nothing that we have seen that showed him, as Secretary Noem said, brandishing a weapon. Have you, sir, seen something different to support what the Secretary said?
Dan, I think what we need to take a look at here is the situation in its totality. What happened leading up to this situation? The suspect decided to inject himself into a law enforcement action. What's not being said here is the fact that Border Patrol agents and law enforcement were conducting a targeted law enforcement effort against a violent, illegal alien that was nearby, and that suspect injected himself into that law enforcement situation with a weapon. And what happened between when that situation first came about and the shooting, that's going to be investigated, and we're going to get to the facts of that.
Well, you said yesterday that this looks like a situation where the individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. What evidence do you have that he wanted to massacre law enforcement? Because all the videos that we have, and I do want to, we just have a still shot up now, but I do, control room, want to play one of the other videos. Let's play video number 1 again. It doesn't look anything like he's trying to massacre law enforcement. In fact, he was filming, and then it looked like he was trying to help another individual there who was pushed down by law enforcement, and then they went after him.
In fact, I believe that the fantastic training that our law enforcement partners have, the fact that they're highly trained, prevented any specific shootings of law enforcement. So good job for our law enforcement in taking him down before he was able to do that. And again, Dana, let's look at why he was there in the first place. Was he simply walking by and just happened to walk into a law enforcement situation and try to direct traffic and stand in the middle of the road and then assault, delay, and obstruct law enforcement? Or was he there for a reason? Did he fall victim to that violent and heated rhetoric by a Mayor Fry, a Governor Waltz? Look, Dana, they're trying to portray Border Patrol agents and ICE agents as Gestapo, Nazi, and many other words. Did this individual fall victim, as many others have, to that type of heated rhetoric?
I want to stay focused on this incident right now, because what you were saying is that he went there to try to stop this law enforcement operation. All of the video that we have seen shows him documenting it with his cell phone, which is a lawful thing to do. And the only time he seemed to interact with law enforcement is when they went after him when he was trying to help an individual who law enforcement pushed down. So where do you have the evidence to show that he was trying to impede that, that law enforcement operation?
Sure, Dana, first he was there in the scene. He was in the scene actively impeding and assaulting law enforcement to the point.
But that's not illegal. He wasn't
Dana,
impeding it. He was filming it, which is a legal thing to do in the United States of America.
Dana, let's don't freeze frame adjudicate this now. He was
No, actually, let's freeze frame adjudicate this now.
there for a reason, and that reason was to impede law enforcement to the point.
What evidence do you have of that?
And here's a good point, Dana, is the fact that de-escalation techniques were utilized during this action. Those de-escalation techniques, whether it was physically trying to remove them from that law enforcement scene, that active law enforcement scene in which law enforcement were going after a violent illegal alien, or the use of pepper spray, which is another de-escalation technique. Those techniques did not work. Officers always try to use the minimum amount of force necessary to either effect an arrest, which is
minimum amount of force necessary. And just as he says that, the video, we hear the gunfire in the background. So of course it's not the minimum amount of force necessary. They used deadly force. They killed somebody. They used deadly force.
in this case was more than likely 18 USC 111, assault on a federal officer, or
Where did he
impede, delay, and
assault?
obstruct.
Where did he assault a federal officer in any of the video that you have seen? Because it looked to us from every angle, sir, that he was approached by them when he was helping another individual who was pushed down. What evidence do you have that he was assaulting any law enforcement?
Dana, we don't need a suspect's help in an active law enforcement scene.
When you say
We don't need his
suspect,
help.
what is
We
he
didn't ask
suspected
his
of?
help. That's an active law enforcement scene. He knew that was an active law enforcement scene, especially when the officers approached him, and it's very evident he did not need to be where he was. And he
when somebody
on his own to stay there.
So when somebody is pushed down and a person's instinct is to help that person, when somebody's pushed down by law enforcement, you're saying that you just stand back and let law enforcement do what they're doing? I mean, is that really human nature?
You know, Dana, every situation is different. What our officers are faced with here in Minneapolis are chaotic, very difficult and violent situations in which individuals, and this suspect is not the only one to bring a loaded weapon to a riot. The situations are chaotic and ever changing. Follow directions for law enforcement. Don't inject yourself knowingly beforehand into a law enforcement situation.
It's very interesting to learn that possessing a firearm, according to Dan Bovino, having possession of a firearm at a law enforcement scene with a bunch of law enforcement around is now suddenly reason to use deadly force. That is basically what he's declaring right now.
With respect, it feels as though in some ways you're blaming the victim here.
The victims are the Border Patrol agents. I'm not blaming the Border Patrol agents. The victim are the Border Patrol agents. The suspect put himself in that situation. The victims are the Border Patrol agents there.
I want to go back to the gun, sir, because I think this is really, really critical. You can see an agent, and I just want to go to, let's see here, video 5. You can see a screenshot of an agent in a green jacket approach Pretti, and then he appeared to take a gun away. When the agent took the gun away, which seems as though it was Pretti's gun, that happened before Pretti was shot. Why was an unarmed man shot multiple times by law enforcement, by your Border Patrol agents?
Dana, you don't know he was unarmed. I don't know he was unarmed. That's freeze frame adjudication of a crime scene via a photo.
Well, yeah, because that's all we got. And we know that we can't trust the federal government to investigate this. So you can bet this is all we're going to get. And we know that from the shooting death on January 7 of Renee Good.
Why we have investigators. That's why we have an investigation that is going to answer those questions. How many shots were fired? Who fired shots? Where was the guns? Where were the guns located? All those questions are going to be answered.
I think you can see the screen.
In the investigation. We're not going to adjudicate that here on TV in one freeze frame there.
Okay, it's not a freeze frame. We're showing
Wow.
a video of one of your agents taking the gun away, and that happened before Pretti was shot.
We don't know that agent was taking any gun away. That could have been the agents, because we don't know that. The facts are going to come to light.
So you're disputing the video that that's what happened?
With an that's why we investigate.
Well, with respect, you say that's why we investigate, but you're also drawing other conclusions that sort of fly in the face of waiting for an investigation.
Exactly.
I just want to also go back to what I was asking about with regard to what Secretary Noem said, that he was brandishing a gun. At any point, do you have any evidence that, yes, he had a gun on his person? Was he brandishing it? Was he a threat because he had a gun in his hand that put law enforcement in danger?
Dana, we heard the law enforcement officer say gun, gun, gun. So at some point, they knew there was a gun. So again, that is going to be part of that investigation as to what was happening on the ground there between those victims, the Border Patrol agent victims, and the suspect.
Both the police chief in Minneapolis, O'Hara, and Governor Walz say Pretti was legally licensed to carry a concealed weapon. So are you saying it's not okay for him to exercise his Second Amendment right, not to mention his First Amendment right to be there in the first place, but his Second Amendment right to carry a gun? And if you do, you can be shot by federal law enforcement?
No, I didn't say that, Dana. I never said that. What I'm saying is we respect that Second Amendment right, but those rights don't count when you riot and assault, delay, obstruct, and impede law enforcement officers, and most especially when you mean to do that beforehand.
How do you know that?
How do we know that?
When you mean to do that beforehand, when you show up to an active crime scene, don't leave the crime scene and you're armed, then you've got the decision-making process
So-
for that individual doesn't seem to be very good. Now, back to the Second Amendment. What you're saying about the Second Amendment is peacefully protesting with firearms. Absolutely, I've done that myself, and fully support that. But not when you perpetrate violence, obstruct, delay, or obfuscate Border Patrol in the performance of their duties in an
There is
active
no
crime
evidence that
scene.
he was perpetrating violence. And there's no evidence, unless you have it, and we'd love to see it if there is, that he was intending to massacre law enforcement, other than the fact that he was there and he had a gun lawfully.
He meant to be there beforehand. Again, Dana, he came there beforehand.
How do you
for
know that?
a reason.
How do you know that?
Because he was there.
But all he
Because
was doing
there.
was filming
It's
and
very
documenting
evident.
it, which is legal. He was carrying a gun, which in Minneapolis
I didn't
is
say
legal.
it wasn't. And I didn't say it wasn't legal.
So
but
then what did he do that was
cannot
illegal?
Assault federal law enforcement when he does that. That's an active law enforcement crime
Where do you
scene
see in the video that
he
he was
decided to enter into?
Where do you see in the video that he was assaulting law enforcement? Because from everything we have seen, law enforcement was assaulting him when he was there trying to help another individual.
Dana, law enforcement doesn't assault anyone. Follow directions of law enforcement. Follow directions of law enforcement in an active crime scene. It's very evident he didn't want to do that.
So here's the suspect. Here's Pretti. Here's Alex Pretti right here filming them. He's actually in the video before the video gets to the part where he gets shot, and this is him filming on the street. And when Bovino says that law enforcement doesn't assault anyone, what actually happens is they push a woman down, and then you can see Alex Pretti coming to her assistance as one of these ICE personnel people sprays what would appear to be mace or pepper spray in his face. So come on, man. We can see the video. I mean, it's not like we don't have a video and we need him to explain it. We can see the video. The video is self-evident.
Very evident that the other individuals didn't want to do that. And, it's too bad the consequences had to be paid because he injected himself into that crime scene. I can't say that enough. He made the decision to go there. We didn't make the decision to talk to him. We didn't even know that individual was in existence until he came into that crime scene.
I want to go back to video number 1, because you keep saying that he injected himself into the crime scene. He was a guy on a street filming an operation. He was far away. He wasn't on the crime scene. And what I want you to see again is that law enforcement appears by the video we have to be approaching him and the person who is next to him, not the other way around. And so what I want to know is, what evidence do you have that he went after law enforcement?
Sure. The fact that he was standing in the middle of the road, there was interaction between him, the bystanders, and law enforcement. And again, follow directions of law enforcement. He doesn't need to be in the middle of a crime scene. Dan, I don't think you would want to be in the middle of a crime scene, or you would want civilians in the middle of a crime scene injecting themselves into something that is none of their business at all.
Can you also just answer the question about the gun? Because again, do you have any evidence that he was brandishing his weapon? Did he ever have his hand on the weapon?
Yeah, again, the officers on the ground, in that melee, we hear gun, gun, gun. So that gun at some point became visible to officers.
But could it have been because they had him on the ground and maybe his shirt came up and they saw that it was on him? That doesn't mean that he was.
And that is why we have an investigation, Dana.
Fine.
That is what we are investigating. You're not going to know that now, and I'm not going to know that.
I think an investigation is great, but the Homeland Security Secretary said he was brandishing a weapon. Do you have evidence that we haven't seen that he was brandishing a weapon?
He brought a semi-automatic weapon to a riot, assaulted federal officers, and at some point they saw that weapon.
They have no evidence that he was brandishing a weapon. He had a weapon on his person, which so many Americans are gun owners. We have more guns in this country than people. So someone having a weapon in their possession is not a reason for a summary execution. And Dana Bash is establishing that in this interview. I really think that if Bovino had any evidence that Pretti brandished, he would say it. He would say, look, the officers did tell me that, but we're investigating the details, something. But there is no evidence on that video of him brandishing a weapon.
So I do believe the secretary is 100% spot on in what she said.
Seeing
Why
a
would you
weapon.
bring a weapon and assault a federal officer if you did not have intent
Okay.
to harm or delay or obstruct that federal officer with a weapon?
You keep saying that he assaulted a federal officer, but again, we have not seen evidence that that happened. It looked like he was on the defense, and again, he had a gun legally. It's sort of feels like we're in the upside down, where we have law enforcement and conservatives who are very pro Second Amendment saying the problem was that he had a gun legally.
No, the problem is, as I said several times now, is he injected himself. He put himself where he did not need to be. He put himself in and put law enforcement officers in jeopardy through his actions. These were his actions, not law enforcement officers' action. We had to react to an individual that came there for a specific reason. And again, what that reason is, we're going to find more out about that in the coming days. I'll be interested to see what his reason for being there while Border Patrol agents were arresting a violent, criminal, illegal alien doing their lawful, ethical, and moral duties in Minneapolis. That's the question.
Well, but the question is also, why is an American citizen now dead for the second time who was there to document, in this case, and clearly to be there as a bystander, which is
It's
his
not
First
clear.
Amendment right.
He wasn't there to clearly document anything. Don't socially engineer the topic, Dana. He was not there to document.
Appeared
he
to
came
be.
there for
That's
a reason.
fair. Appeared to
and
be.
he obfuscated and delayed officers there on the scene. That's pretty evident to me.
I want to ask you about your agents. You said that this was a highly trained agent who had been serving on Border Patrol for 8 years. What was he trained for? Because these are your Border Patrol agents, and they're now in the interior of the country, in American cities. Was he trained in urban policing?
Yes, all of our Border Patrol agents are trained in all for all types of environments, including urban policing. This particular Border Patrol agent had 8 years with some specific skill sets there with both firearms and less lethal munitions. Also, let's take a look at the training and the environments that Border Patrol agents operate in. We operate in places like San Diego, California, Tucson, Arizona, New Orleans. All those have Border Patrol sectors. Detroit, Michigan. We've got Border Patrol sectors in Buffalo. So this myth, and I saw this just last night on CNN, this myth that Border Patrol agents don't work in urban areas is just that. It's a myth. We're well adept at urban areas, conducting that Title VIII immigration enforcement wherever we go. It doesn't matter if it's a desert or an urban environment. We're very well adept at doing that.
Is the agent or agents, is it your understanding that more than one agent fired a weapon at Alex Pretti?
Again, that's going to be part of the investigation. I'm not going to speculate on how many shots or who shot or that type of thing because I don't know.
Are the agents who were involved still on the job?
Yes, they're these Border Patrol agents are going to more than likely be on administrative duty, but they will remain Border Patrol agents. Yes.
What does that mean? So they'll be off the streets for a bit?
Not in Minneapolis, they will, but only in Minneapolis here. They'll be at a different location.
Okay. And before I let you go, I just want to button up one point that you were making about what Alex Pretti was doing there. Do you accept that it is the law that an individual has a right to film what law enforcement is doing?
I believe that all citizens of the United States have those First and Fourth Amendment rights as long as they do so peacefully and don't delay, obstruct, or assault anyone in doing that. And that's the issue here because he was not peacefully doing anything.
All right. And just for the record, and we've seen this video multiple times from multiple angles, there is no evidence that he was doing anything other than being peaceful until the altercation began. Again, I look forward to seeing the other evidence in the investigation that you have, because we do want to get to the bottom of this and do want to get all of the facts as they actually happened.
Wow, that's quite an interview there by Dana Bash. And I'm telling you right now, there are going to be a lot of gun owners that are going to be alarmed at this conversation that we're having right now. I mean, he is effectively saying we have a federal law enforcement official, a high serving federal law enforcement official, effectively saying that if you are legally carrying a firearm and you get into some sort of situation with ICE personnel and you get shot dead, that somehow legitimizes getting shot dead. I mean, there was no pushback from him on that point, and really no affirmation of Second Amendment rights. I mean, that is going to get the attention of a lot of people on the right. You can absolutely best believe that. And you can see it a little bit on the right on social media. Many people of whom are scratching their head and saying things like, wow, you know, I think President Trump is not being advised well. Well, I'll say that's problematic. That's hugely problematic. He had a legal right to carry. He had a concealed carry permit. That's what Alex Pretti had. So anyway, that was the interview between Dan Bovino and Dana Bash on CNN this morning. And CNN has done something that CNN doesn't often do, which is affirm what facts are in a news piece. Instead of playing around with both sides or whatever the heck it is, you can see with your own eyes what is going on here. You see Alex Pretti with a cell phone filming ICE personnel. They come over to him. There is an altercation. They actually, it's funny, it's crazy to watch it, because what actually starts the whole thing off, which you can't see from the first angle of when this video first came out and the news broke, there was an angle where a car was in the way and you couldn't really see what was going on. But this is actually kicked off by the fact that one of the ICE personnel folks pushes a woman down. And when they push her down, he comes over to assist. And that's when that same person pepper sprays him in the face. And that's how this whole thing gets started. It wasn't because Alex Pretti came over and did something physical with these ICE personnel individuals, or whoever they are. I'm using a broad term, quite frankly, because I don't see any identifying markers on these people that would indicate that they're sworn law enforcement or that, in fact, they are law enforcement. We just have the federal government telling us that. We don't have any actual evidence of that. And so I'm a little bit skeptical, as I think most people should be, of this administration. At any rate, that is a stunner of an interview. And wow, a lot to take in there. And I'm telling you, the 2A people, the Second Amendment folks, that's going to get their attention. I mean, if you own a firearm and you come across somebody who's ICE personnel and you happen to be filming them and you get into some sort of fracas, I mean, we've already known for weeks now, particularly in Minneapolis, these ICE folks like to have confrontations. They're pulling people out of vehicles. They're walking over to people's cars and trying to open the door and get into the vehicle. There are no commands given beforehand. We're not seeing that, which is typical professional law enforcement behavior. You say to somebody, okay, exit the vehicle, or you have a conversation. It leads up. If it escalates, get out of the vehicle. We're not really seeing a whole lot of communication. And you can see in this video from yesterday, not a whole lot of talking going on. It's like, I'm coming over to you and I'm pushing you down into the snow onto the ground. Then I'm pepper spraying you in the face. And we've seen that in other videos as well. So, I mean, come on now. There is a certain way to do things procedurally that professional law enforcement do, and we are not seeing that from these individuals claiming to be whatever they are, an appendage of the Department of Homeland Security or whoever they are. Again, we don't know who they are because they're wearing masks. They have no shields or badges. They have no shield number, and they have no identifying name tag, which is what law enforcement has all across this country. in every major American city. And they're not afraid of being doxxed. They're not afraid of their name being public. They're not afraid of their badge number being out. So what are they talking about on the federal level? What are we talking about? So that was very interesting. I'll be back with something perhaps a little bit later in this evening. Thanks everybody for watching. Please hit the like button. Really appreciate it. This is Lauren Burke. And this was Lauren Live.
Somewhere. What's going on? Thank you. Are you watching now?
Yeah. No, I was watching when I left, but it's excellent. I love it. I love the traffic's blowing up. You were in Brooklyn last night. Where?
I was in Bushwick.
Okay, I have my grandmother's house in Crown Heights.
Oh, yeah.
So when I saw you, I was trying to look at what the pizza place was to see where
As soon as we got there, someone recognized the pizza place. They're like, we got to get out of here. Someone had
get out. It was great.
blown up our spot.
Their show was freaking fantastic.
Thank you.
Love it. Love it, man. Love it.